Welcome to Steps to My True Self, Self Inquiry, and Self Realization. Thank you for joining me today. Today's question is: who am I and how do I identify? What is the source of my being? How did I come into being? Um, what is the source of my existence, allowing me this world experience? Hail to the primal light. All is myself, and I alone exist. Hail, hail, hail. Hail to the primal light. Hail to the light throughout the ages. Hail to the true light. Hail to the transparent light. Hail to the light without beginning nor end. Hail, hail, hail. Hail to the primal light, self supreme, primal light, Aten Ra. I bow to the primal guru. I bow to the eternal truth. I bow to the great supreme wisdom. I bow to the great supreme intelligence. Hail, hail, hail. Hail to the primal light. Thank you again for joining me with Steps to My True Self, Self Inquiry, and Self Realization. We have to self inquire. This is how we will get to know who we are. So today we are asking the question: who am I? What is the source of my existence? How did I come into being? What is the source of my existence, allowing me this world experience? What is this world? What is all of this? How did it all come into being? Who is self supreme? Primal light, Aten Ra. Who is self supreme? Primal light, Aten Ra. Self supreme, Aten Ra, is the source of all of our being. And so the self supreme primal light is a neutral self, and she carries no charge. While we carry a negative charge, and our dual nature, the consciousness, self-consciousness, carry a positive charge. The self-supreme primal light, she dwells in the non-duality, or she's the only one that is a non-dual being in the world. And all of us, we are partial duality being, or duality being, duality consciousness. That means we're sleeping or dreaming and not aware of ourselves. How did the self come into being? The primordial self as an egg existed with the primordial witness self in stillness as a self atom or pure atom. The primordial self wanted to create, so the primordial witness self hit the primordial egg, the self atom, and there we have the Big Bang. Split into tiny particles, all the self electrical particles moves to one side, and all the pure consciousness magnetic particles moves to the other side, with the void between them as the non-dual self spread out, unmanifest, infinite, formless, boundless, omnipresent, non-dual self. The self then makes a manifestation of itself in a baby form, and there we have the self manifest right here. So the self manifest is the baby self of the unmanifest. And so we have the non duality here, where this is the void between the primal light and the pure consciousness. So they have void between, they're in awareness of each other, they're in awareness of themselves and awareness of their light. And so this is the non duality. The non dual self manifests, then self replicates. Then self manifests gives it a replica of its non dual cosmic consciousness. Then obscure the light to create the duality cosmic consciousness. The self supreme self manifest is going to make a baby self, and this baby self becomes the primal light, self supreme, Aten Ra. Her first baby self, self supreme, primal light, Aten Ra. Enter into the duality cosmos to create a duality world. The self-supreme primal light is the baby self of the self-manifest. All the other galaxies are baby self of the manifest supreme self. Remember, the manifest supreme self is the baby self of the unmanifest. Self-supreme primal light rise with her light. When self-supreme primal light rises from the primordial self-manifest, she rise, and then her light rose with her sun. Then from the pure consciousness, her self-consciousness arise, and then her consciousness arise. She have herself, her sun, her self-consciousness, and her consciousness. So what she's going to do now, she wants to create, so she's first going to make a non-dual consciousness for herself. She takes her light, she put the light behind the consciousness with the void between it, and she creates a non-dual consciousness for herself. Then she makes a self-replica of her light, she puts it behind her primal self-consciousness, because she's going to make him into a pure being. When you first come in, you as a pure being, you write out your destiny. So she asked him to write out his destiny with her. So when she creates the world, she knows what she wants for him to do. He has to write out his destiny with her. All of these selves are going to enter into the world separately. So everything becomes sovereign. So this is the great thing about the self, is that the self allows all aspects of itself to explore with sovereignty. But you're going to see once they get into the duality that the gods do not allow the self its sovereignty. It imprisons the self in the dream. So once the self-supreme primal light, Aten Ra, created her non-dual consciousness, she makes a self-replica of her non-dual consciousness, and she gives a self-replica to her primal self-consciousness. Her primal self-consciousness writes out his destiny with her, because he's the masculine principle and she is a feminine principle. So now she have her self-consciousness, she have her consciousness, and she have her sun. So what she's doing next now, she wants to create a world. So what is she going to do? She makes a replica of herself, because all of herselves, they're going to be the world. She makes a self-replica of herself. The first self-replica is the primal guru, the supreme teacher. The primal supreme teacher. Self-consciousness arises from the primal self-consciousness, and that was Osiris. She gave them a replica of her non-dual consciousness, and she have them write out their destiny with her. The second self she self-replicates, this self now is going to become the self that becomes the world, and it becomes the manager of the world. Self-supreme Aten Ra remains the supreme manager, supervisor, director of the world. And so this self of hers now is Supreme Self, Supreme Ra. Supreme Self, Supreme Ra will be the world. Supreme Ra self-consciousness is set. Self-supreme Aten Ra have Supreme Ra and Set write out their destiny with her, because she know what she wants for them to do when they enter the world, and they also wrote out what is it that they wanted to do when they enter into the world, because Supreme Ra is going to be the world. This self-replica of hers is going to be the world. And so Supreme Ra self-replicates, and self-replicates Amun Ra, because Amun Ra is going to be her body. Supreme Ra is a self-replica of the self-supreme primal light, who becomes the world. And she writes out her destiny with self-supreme primal light Aten Ra, and Set wrote out his destiny also. Then she makes her third self-replica, and that becomes Nut, and Nut is the sky, and Nut self-consciousness arise, and that's Gabriel, the Archangel Gabriel. She makes a self-replica of her non-dual consciousness. She gives it to them. They write out their destiny. All of these selves are going to do the same thing, just like what Self Supreme Aten Ra makes a replica of herself, and they're all her supreme self. They're also going to do the same thing. They're going to make self replicas of themselves, and they're going to write out their destinies also. Supreme Ra now makes two self replicas of herself, and their self consciousness arose. So the self replica that she makes is Amun Ra. Amun Ra becomes her body. Her other self replica is Saturn. To make the world, because she's in the duality, self supreme, Aten Ra, she takes back the non dual consciousness from all of herself, and she gives Supreme Ra the duality consciousness. What she does to make the duality consciousness, she makes a self replica of her consciousness, and then she turned the light off. So, and put the consciousness to sleep. Once you do that, the consciousness is in unawareness of itself and it cannot see its light. There is no void between the consciousness and the light. They're on one sheet and the consciousness cannot see it. When the consciousness is in the non-duality, there's a space between and there is a void, and consciousness can see itself and can see the light. Now, when she makes a duality, she obscures the light. So consciousness cannot see it. She removed the void and she put the light and merge it into consciousness. So consciousness cannot see the light. It's right behind it. Once this happened, now she gives this duality consciousness the Supreme Ra. Supreme Ra is going to be the world. The Supreme Ra, our self-replica, Amun Ra, becomes the body. Her body becomes her body, her sun. She uses her sun for her body. The self-replica of the primal teacher, the primal guru, is Geb. So she makes a self-replica, and Geb is the earth, and then it goes inside of Amun Ra, and we're using their suns. So what the Self-Supreme is doing is using the suns of her self-replicas to create the world, because they are young and in baby stage. The suns are young. So you can, turn the light off and create with it, whatever is it that you want to create. So she's creating the world. She puts Geb sun inside of Amun Ra's, and they're both sleeping. So there is no light. It's completely dark. So the world is being built in darkness because they're sleeping. So they're all sleeping. Now consciousness, now the duality consciousness is dreaming now. Supreme Ra is directing the dream, because whatever she wants, how she wants to build the world, she's directing the dream. But later on, we will come to find out that her consciousness gets so impure that she was not able to control her mind anymore. Consciousness started doing a whole lot of crazy things. Consciousness was going insane. These are all the supreme selves came into being. Now for the baby self now, which a lot of us are the baby self that's in the world, self-supreme primal light, Aten Ra, she brings the pure atom, and then Supreme Ra becomes the surrogate mother. She brings them out. So we have two mothers, Supreme Ra and the Self-Supreme Primal Light. We have a surrogate mother and we have our real mother. So our real mother is the Self-Supreme Primal Light, Aten Ra. She makes lots of baby self and send them out into the world to explore, because she wants to explore the world in every different regard, every different aspect of the duality. She wants to explore it so she can learn about it. These are all the baby selves. So when the baby selves are coming into the world now, baby self of the primal light, we also do the same thing what the primal light did. The primal light made 3 self replicas. We are going to make 2 and 1 baby self. So that's what happened. When we come into being, Supreme Ra brings us into being, from the self atom of the self supreme Aten Ra. She becomes like the supreme vagina, where the self just comes out from the light. When we come into being, We also are given the non-dual consciousness by Self-Supreme Aten Ra. We write out our destiny with Supreme Ra. And then our self-consciousness arise from the primal self-consciousness, but through Shiva. Shiva is, Horus is the first baby self. So Horus is the first baby self of the primal self-consciousness, and Set is the first baby self of self-supreme primal light, Aten Ra. Our personal baby self is Set and Shiva. So that's the feminine and the masculine principle. And so all the other baby selves now, they came. And so what you're doing now, you make two self-replicas. You write out your destiny, what you're going to do in the world, and how you're going to exit the world. You write out your destiny, you make a self-replica, your self-replica writes out its destiny with you, and then you make a baby self when you're coming into the world. Make the baby self, and you carry the baby self with you. Now, one of your self-replicas is going to come into the world as another human being like you, and then the other self-replica is gonna enter the world disembodied. It's gonna have no body, but it's gonna explore the world. And this is one of the gods, one of yourself that's exploring the world as the gods and the people them worshiping. And then your self-consciousness is going to do the same thing. If this one come into the world in a body, so does this one. Then this one goes out into the world disembodied, so does this one. So you're gonna have two of yourself out into the world disembodied as the gods, the magnetic beings, and they're in 100% ego, while we, the primal light self, when we come into the body, we come into the body as 50% ego, because the self comes in with its light on. Only the baby self come into the world sleeping. And so what happened now is that when it's time to enter the world, you have to return back the non-dual consciousness, and then Supreme Ra gives you the duality consciousness. And you have to go to sleep to enter into the world, to enter into the screen, because it's a movie. So once you enter into the movie now, this is where you enter into the duality. So who is the source of our being? The Self-Supreme Aten Ra. Self-Supreme Aten Ra is the source of all of our beings and not the God. My Self-Supreme Primal Light Aten Ra exists as a neutral self. She does not carry any charge. The Self-Supreme Aten Ra is all of creation wearing this guise. And so this is what the problem in the world. We enter the world in a disguise. We cannot recognize ourselves because we are wearing the ego costume. Remember that the gods are our self-consciousness, and our self-replicas, they are exploring the world as the supreme ego. They are exploring the world not in their real self, but they are in a disguise. They're in a disguise, and they don't recognize themselves. They don't recognize the Self-Supreme Aten Ra, and she doesn't recognize them, because the self is sleeping, and this monster arose out of the consciousness, and it's been trying to enslave her from the moment that she came into this dream. Okay, know that the gods have spread propaganda and lots of lies and deception, and they wrote all their books and their stories and all their fears that they have imprinted in the mind. But we were not created by any gods. The gods are our dual nature, and the gods are in ignorance of themselves. So we were never created. We came into being. All right. So when we come into the world, we were supposed to rise up. The self was supposed to rise up. But what happened is that the ego tranced the self in the sleep. And from then on, the self never rose. It's been sleeping. So the real self sleeps, so the ego arises from the consciousness. and trance and trick the self into sleep so that the ego can rise up instead of the self. So herself are wearing disguises and does not recognize itself because of the ego disguise. The time has come when all the self-wearing disguises must take off their disguise so they can recognize themselves as the one and only self-supreme. Primalite Aten Ra is my self-supreme, is your self-supreme self, and we are the baby self of the self-supreme primal light Aten Ra. Self-supreme primal light Aten Ra is the baby self of the self-manifest. And the self-manifest is the baby self of the self-unmanifest. All right? So let's remember that. Hail, 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 hail to the primal light. All is myself, and I alone exist. So I thank you for joining me today. Hail, hail to the primal light. Hail to the light throughout the ages. Hail to the true light. Hail to the transparent light. Hail to the light without beginning or end. Hail, hail, hail. Hail to the primal light. I bow to the primal guru. I bow to the eternal truth. I bow to the great supreme wisdom. I bow to the great supreme intelligence. Hail, 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 hail to the primal light. Self-supreme, primal light, self-supreme, Aten Ra. I seek refuge. I seek refuge. I seek refuge in the primal light. I seek refuge in the true light. Self-supreme. Aten Ra.